The wealthy man rescued an orphan girl and hired her to take care of his sick son. Setting up a baby monitor in his room, he froze at what he saw. After the death of his beloved wife, Shen, the head of a food company, Trevor Roy didn't believe he could love again and find happiness. But as they say, time heals all wounds. Amanda Scott, Trevor's mother, often remarked, "Simon needs a mother." The young widower met Emma, and within a week, he realized she was the woman with whom he was ready to spend the rest of his life. Emma quickly bonded with his 6-year-old son, Simon, which was a significant factor. A couple of months after they met, Trevor proposed to Emma, and they had a splendid wedding. Amanda Scott was delighted. "Now I can die without fear," the elderly mother said. "You and Simon are in good hands." "Why are you saying that, Mom?" Simon chuckled. "We haven't even given you grandchildren with Emma yet. You'll dance at Simon's wedding too." After their honeymoon in the Seychelles, the newlyweds began their family life, which Trevor thought was wonderful. Unfortunately, there was a fly in the ointment. After some time, Trevor faced a serious problem. Simon started falling ill too often, and his father couldn't understand why. His new stepmother loved the boy dearly and provided him with ideal conditions, but to no avail. One illness was replaced by another. If not a cold, then tonsillitis or even bronchitis. "Maybe we should send him to a health camp?" Emma suggested. "But Simon has never been away from home for long," Trevor pondered. "Well, you know, everything happens for the first time," his wife said. "Yeah, but he's only 6, he objected. "Seems a bit early to me." "What's the harm? It will do Simon good, make him more independent, and most importantly, he'll breathe fresh air, change surroundings, climate. Have you considered that maybe city life isn't suitable for him?" "No, I haven't," Trevor shook his head. "I don't understand anything at all. Everything used to be fine before, but now he keeps falling sick." "Trevor, I'm doing everything I can," Emma said. "I watch his diet, regularly ventilate his room." "Maybe we should ventilate his room less often?" "I think it's too cold in there," he suggested. "That's okay," his young wife replied. "It's worse when it's too hot. Besides, fresh air reduces the number of microbes. But you know, I'm not a doctor. At the camp, Simon will be under the care of specialists." "Well, maybe you're right," Trevor said thoughtfully. "Perhaps a health camp isn't such a bad idea after all." "Okay, I'll look into it." And the loving father began to explore various options for children's health resorts and, it seems, found one that would suit Simon. He promptly contacted the camp administration and ensured it was a suitable choice. "We have an individual approach to each child," a pleasant and well-spoken female voice chirped. "The minimum stay is 1 month." "1 month," Muratov repeated quietly, his voice faltering. However much Trevor understood the necessity of this trip, he wasn't ready to part with his son for a whole month. "Yes, a month," confirmed the administrator. "But don't worry, you'll be able to visit your child on any convenient day." "Well, that's not bad," Trevor replied. "How do I sign up?" "Leave an application on the website. We will contact you." Okay. So that was it. All that remained was to mentally prepare his son for the trip. After all, the little boy was about to leave his home for a whole month. To Trevor's surprise, Sergei's eyes lit up. "And I'll play with other kids there?" With excitement, the boy asked, and his father sighed. Needless to say, Simon missed interaction with peers. He used to go to daycare, but once the series of colds started, Trevor withdrew him from there. So Emma was right all along. The children's health camp was a great idea from any perspective. However, a week before departure, the boy complained of a severe headache. Placing his hand on his son's forehead, Trevor gasped. Sergei's forehead was as hot as an oven. The mercury column on the thermometer showed a temperature over 40 degrees. "Lord, this is the last thing we needed," the father muttered in frustration, sinking into a chair. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, entering the room and hearing her husband's last words. Well, Simon fell ill again, Trevor complained with a sigh. And it seems quite serious. The young woman stared closely at her stepson and frowned. Simon's face was flushed, and sweat broke out on his forehead. Looks like we'll have to postpone the trip, the husband shook his head. Are you sure? There's still a whole week until departure. Maybe he'll recover by then? Emma suggested. Maybe he will. Okay, let's wait a day. However, the next day Simon felt no better. He was delirious and visibly weakening. Finally, the father called an ambulance. There can be no talk of any trip, the doctor shook his head when Trevor voiced his plans. Understood, nodded the father. And also, the doctor continued, I would recommend you find a qualified caregiver. Clear. Thank you. What do you mean, a caregiver? Emma exclaimed as soon as the doctor closed the door. Why do we need a stranger in the house? Do you understand anything about medicine? Trevor interrupted her. Well, no, but. Then the discussion is over, he cut her off. Tonight, I'll visit the agency's website and find a caregiver. Understanding that her husband's intention to hire a caregiver for their son was firm and not subject to appeal, Emma didn't argue and nodded in agreement. Well, that's good, Trevor concluded. And now I need to go to the office. Keep an eye on Simon. If anything urgent comes up, call me. After dealing with some urgent matters at work, Trevor hurried home. He trusted Emma as much as he trusted himself, but he felt more at ease when Simon was nearby. As he drove across the bridge, he noticed a very young, poorly dressed girl. She was gazing thoughtfully at the water, then swung her leg over the railing with a clear intention to jump. Trevor abruptly hit the brakes and jumped out of the car. What are you doing? He shouted, pulling the stranger away from the railing. Life isn't worth living? I'm tired of it, the girl sobbed. This isn't life. All right, let's get in the car, commanded the businessman, and she hesitated before complying. What's your name? Trevor asked kindly. Lola, the girl replied timidly. Well, Lola, go ahead, tell me why life isn't worth it for such a young and beautiful person. Oh, do you mind if I use you informally? It's okay, she waved her hand and added, I'm pregnant. Oh, congratulations. Trevor shook his head with reproach. So, you've decided not only to end your own life, but also that of an innocent child? My fiancé left me, the girl sobbed. I trusted him, and he treated me so cruelly. I understand, Trevor nodded sympathetically. But that still isn't a reason to deprive yourself and your child of life. It's easy for you to say, huh? Lola sighed. I have no one to turn to, and nowhere to live. Are you from an orphanage, then? No, she shook her head. I am an orphan, but not from an orphanage. Lola's father left the family when she was 2 years old, running off with his mistress. Her mother raised her alone, and when Lola turned 14, she met Eric. He settled into their village home, fixing everything that needed repairs. Initially, he seemed hardworking, and mother and daughter forgot what it was like to handle typical male household tasks. The idyll lasted exactly 1 month. Then Eric began disappearing on benders that could last for months. Mom, why don't you kick him out? Lola would ask. What do you need him for? You wouldn't understand, sighed Caitlin. He's not perfect, but he's ours. Then her mother fell ill. Stage 4 left no chance of recovery. Caitlin burned out like a candle in just a few months. Eric stayed on with his stepdaughter. I'm legally registered here, so I'm not leaving, declared the stepfather. Living with a stranger essentially, Lola wasn't happy. But there was nothing she could do, as Eric was indeed legally registered there. After a while, the young couple rented an apartment together. We found a 1-bedroom in a barracks by the river, she said. Not much, but at least it's just the two of us. Trevor thoughtfully shook his head. He knew those barracks by the river, infamous for their bedbugs. In town, it was rumored they were set to be demolished long ago. However, the news of Lola's pregnancy didn't please him at all. The poor girl had to leave her rented apartment. But when she returned to her mother's house, she found out that her stepfather had squandered everything. How can someone drink away a house like that? Trevor marveled. Uncle Emmett got into serious debt, she explained. He owed our village stores and liquor outlets. While my mom was alive, she begged people not to lend him money. But after she died, he really let loose. Eventually, they took the house. Those must have been some debts, exclaimed the unexpected savior. Indeed, quite substantial, sighed the girl. Even though the house was a dump, it was still a roof over our heads. But the new tenants had the money. They'll fix up that shack. But as for me, nowhere to go, and pregnant. Jumping into the river seems like the only option. There's always a way out, Trevor slowly spoke. No, I won't get an abortion, Lola shook her head. Mom made sure Emma didn't repeat her mistakes. Shortly before her death, she told me she was pregnant when our dad left us. Mom didn't keep him around and had an abortion. Then she wanted to have a baby with Eric, but couldn't. Mom had a negative resource factor. I see, sighed the businessman. He was puzzled. Unlike many businessmen, Trevor Roy hadn't lost his ability to empathize with others, and so he wanted very much to help this stranger. But how could he help her? What can you do? Trevor asked. In what sense? Lola frowned. Do you think that just because you have money, you can make? The girl fell silent. The businessman looked at her perplexedly. Finally, when Trevor realized what she meant, he burst out laughing. Wait, Lola, Trevor chuckled. Did you think I was suggesting something intimate? She blushed. Would you like to work as a maid for me? The man asked. Do you need a maid? Well, you could say so, Trevor nodded. I already have a maid, but she doesn't quite suit me, Lola replied. What's wrong with her? Lola inquired. What if I don't suit you for the same reason? I would hope that won't be the case, he smiled. My previous maid, let's say, exceeded her job description. But I would still like to know what skills you have. She remained silent for about half a minute, then finally said, I have unfinished medical training. Oh, really? Trevor exclaimed. Why unfinished, if it's not a secret? I was studying, but I had to drop out. I got in on my own, went through the competition, completed 3 courses, but then pregnancy happened. Why didn't you take an academic leave then? I didn't really think about it. I see, he nodded, then it struck him. What if he hired this girl as a caregiver for Simon? 3 courses already means something, Trevor thought, and after explaining the situation, he offered Lola the job. Oh no, she panicked, I'm afraid I won't cope. But surely you learned something in mid-school? Trevor widened his eyes and added, it can't be that bad. She hesitated for a while, but Trevor's natural persuasiveness, which he possessed as a businessman, did its job. Plus, Lola found the salary enticing. In that moment, she felt both joy and shame. Just think, a few minutes ago she wanted to end her life, and now she found a job. Truly, you never know where you'll find or lose something. Emma, on the other hand, was beside herself with rage. She took the appearance of the stranger in the house as a personal affront. Why do you need this homeless girl? His wife exclaimed in disbelief. Why did you bring her here? She'll only make things worse. Where did you get that idea? Trevor asked peaceably. Lola has an unfinished medical degree. If she had completed university, she would have been a very capable therapist. That's exactly it, unfinished, Emma continued to heat up. Emma, do you really think I would have hired Lola if she didn't understand? We talked, and I'm convinced she's right for us. But I don't know, his wife snapped irritably. Some half-trained doctor, and pregnant on top of that. Honestly, it just doesn't sit right with me. Everything will be fine. This is doubtful, thought Emma. Lola indeed made an impression as someone who knew her stuff. Despite not being a qualified doctor, she immediately diagnosed the same condition as the visiting physician. Lola noticed that the room where the child lived was very damp. Most likely, that's why he gets sick so often, she suggested. Change the room, and everything should improve. And there's no need to move to any other city. Snob, Emma thought spitefully. She least wanted to live under the same roof with some ragamuffin. However, Trevor stood his ground. A sixth sense seemed to guide him, there would be benefit. And he turned out to be right. Simon grew fond of Lola. If not as a real mother, then certainly as a good, kind relative. But, as they say, trust but verify. Trevor decided to err on the side of caution and installed a baby monitor. Firstly, he needed to ensure that Lola indeed deserved trust. Secondly, he could keep an eye on his son's condition while away on business trips. The baby monitor was a regular video camera. It wasn't hidden and stood in the most visible place, on the table. When Trevor was in the office, he periodically reviewed the recordings and was satisfied. Lola handled her responsibilities perfectly. And the little one wasn't disappointed in her. But Emma. Trevor wasn't born yesterday and suspected that his wife was unhappy with the girl's presence. No matter how hard Emma tried to convince him of the sitter's lack of professionalism, the businessman felt there was something else at play. Maybe Emma is just jealous? Trevor pondered. When he first saw Lola, he didn't even notice her appearance. But then, when the guest tidied up and put on nice clothes bought with the advance payment, Trevor noted that she was quite attractive. Lola had a distinctly Slavic appearance, light blonde hair, slightly slanted bright blue eyes, soft pink lips, and a light natural blush. And she was more than just attractive. Emma, of course, also, but if we're honest, her beauty was the result of a good stylist, makeup artist, and hairdresser. People like Emma are usually called striking, but not beauties. So, perhaps that was the whole thing? Emma needs to bring back a more expensive gift from her trip, Trevor thought. She loves that. And then we can go somewhere for a break. I need to go on a business trip tomorrow, Trevor announced during dinner, for a couple of weeks. Will you manage here without me? Of course, darling, Emma nodded. Is it the first time? Anyway, there won't be any unpleasant surprises from my side, she added with a disapproving glance at Lola. Trevor sighed inwardly. Here we go again. Continuing to observe his son and the caretaker, he became increasingly convinced that Lola was a godsend. The caregiver spent practically the whole day with Simon, checking on his well-being, regularly measuring his temperature, and giving him prescribed medications. In short, she was conscientious in her work. And qualifications? So what if there are quacks among certified professionals too? At least they work for years in hospitals. And here it's like she's a gift from above. Trevor hoped that Emma would change her attitude towards Lola. What unpleasant surprises could there be? Trevor smiled. The main thing is that you all live harmoniously. Lola and I get along harmoniously, Simon smiled. Great then, his father concluded. Emma continued to sit with a sour expression. Not that she was jealous of her husband's attention to their stepson's caregiver, but she did have concerns that this dubious upstart with alleged medical training might encroach on her position. Emma saw only one way to get rid of the hated caregiver from their home, to undermine her. But how? Never mind, the young woman thought optimistically. There will be a way. So, from now on, Emma told Lola as soon as Trevor closed the door behind him, you'll eat in the kitchen. Okay, the caregiver shrugged, but the boy protested. No, Lola will eat with us. Simon, while Dad's not home, things will be done my way, his stepmother cut him off. No, the boy frowned. Oh, you little. Emma was about to scold him, but remembering the baby monitor, she held back. It was one thing to put the help in their place, quite another to yell at a child. Trevor wouldn't forgive Emma for that. Simon, she spoke in a honeyed voice, it's necessary this way. Lola will eat in the kitchen. After all, the gardener and the security guard eat in the kitchen, and it's not a big deal. No, the child stood his ground. And you're bad. Simon, we really need to, the caregiver said, squatting down. I'll eat in the kitchen, and then, as usual, I'll come to you. It's really not that bad, is it? Okay, the little boy nodded after a moment of thought. After breakfast, Lola took Simon out for a walk. Think, Emma, think, she told herself mentally. There must be some way to get rid of this beggar from here. The homeowner's wife went up to her stepson's room, intending once again to air it out, and then her gaze fell on the baby monitor. Of course. Emma suddenly realized. Why didn't I think of this sooner? Emma's cunning plan was as simple as can be. She purposely placed her wallet in the boy's room in a way that would be visible on the baby monitor. Lola would surely take it, and Emma would convince her husband that his protege was just a common thief. Her calculation was spot on. Lola noticed the wallet and, assuming it belonged to Emma, decided to return it. Is this yours, Emma? Lola asked, holding out her find. For you, I am Emma Collin, she arrogantly replied. Emma Collin, is this your wallet? The caregiver repeated with barely concealed irony. It's mine, she nodded and, opening it, exclaimed, and what did you bring me? A wallet, Lola said puzzledly. A wallet? Emma yelled. But it's empty. Well, I didn't know that, the girl said decisively, guessing what this arrogant person was hinting at. I saw it and brought it straight to you. Whether it was empty or had something inside, I didn't check. But I did check, and there were $300 and credit cards in there, and you've cleaned it all out. Well, yes, I'm such a fool to use a credit card and then you'd get an SMS notification, Lola remarked with a smirk. In the end, she was also a person and wouldn't allow Emma to humiliate her and accuse her of something she didn't do. How am I supposed to know what's on your mind? Emma grumbled and added, you sneaked away where there's no camera, took everything out, and then decided to play fair? Well, get out of here. Thieves have no place in a decent house. And consider the money you stole as your severance pay. But I didn't take any money, Lola objected, her voice trembling. So here's how it is, the mistress said sternly. If you don't leave here within 15 minutes, you'll be explaining this somewhere else. Believe me, it'll be much harder. Who do you think they'll believe? Me, the wife of a well-known businessman, or some beggar pretending to be a half-baked doctor? Lola realized arguing was pointless and went to her room to pack her things. The homeowner's wife followed closely behind. Watch out, you might just take something else, Emma remarked. She watched as Lola gathered her belongings, feeling triumphant. Everything went according to plan. Meanwhile, Lola, swallowing tears, left the room and the house. At least Simon hadn't witnessed it. But everything else was just plain awful. The few coins found in Lola's wallet wouldn't even cover a couple of nights in the cheapest hostel. Trevor was, to put it mildly, bewildered. He had just been talking to his wife, who had informed him she had fired the caregiver for theft. Supposedly, Lola had stolen money from her. He didn't want to believe it. Trevor had helped the poor girl out of human kindness, and this was how she repaid him? Reviewing the footage, he saw that Lola did indeed take Emma's wallet from the table. But did she take any money from it? That was the question. On the other hand, he had no reason not to trust his wife. Yes, Emma didn't like the caregiver, but such a blatant accusation was too much. Besides, Emma loved Simon, wished him well, and couldn't ignore the fact that Lola's presence had been beneficial for him. The camera couldn't confirm the precise theft of money, but it was true that Lola had handled the wallet. You know, when someone is strapped for cash, they might resort to anything, Emma argued. How do you know what her real problems are? Maybe she owes money to someone? What do you really know about her, apart from what she's told you? Nothing. There was certainly a point in her words. No matter how much you feed a wolf, it still looks to the forest. So, as sad as it was more likely that Lola did steal the money. Emma sipped white wine, nibbling on exotic fruits, openly gloating. She had achieved her goal. Lived in a decent house, slept on clean sheets. Time to bid farewell, Emma thought. Where's Lola? Simon asked when she entered his room. Lola doesn't work here anymore, Emma shrugged and opened the window. Why? The child asked innocently. Because your Lola stole my money, the stepmother gladly recounted. You're lying. Lola is good, you're bad, Simon retorted. Believe what you want, Emma shrugged. Please close the window, Simon requested. I'm cold. Fine, Emma replied after a brief pause, closing the window. The next day, the boy again felt unwell. I feel bad, Simon complained to Emma. What's wrong with you now? Lola rolled her eyes. The boy was all red, and his eyes gleamed with an unhealthy shine. Give me syrup, the boy quietly pleaded. What syrup? Emma asked. You don't even know what syrup, the boy exclaimed in despair. Why did you send Lola away? I told you, she's a thief, Emma snapped. Not another word about her, understood? Simon was unusually perceptive for his age and suspected he wouldn't achieve anything. He'd better wait for Dad. Even so, his stepmother eventually gave him the syrup he needed and left the room. She wanted to open the window, but the boy said he was very cold, so Emma decided against it. The little boy started to weaken, and it wasn't just because of illness. Simon felt that only Lola truly cared about him. His father, of course, loved him dearly too, but he worked a lot and couldn't spend enough time with him. Emma, on the other hand, couldn't care less about the boy. All that concerned her was her own image and Trevor's money kept in the safe. Emma had known the safe's code for a long time, so nothing stopped her from taking as much as she needed from there, leaving behind trivial amounts. Meanwhile, Lola was once again going through tough times. After spending 2 nights in a hostel, she set out to find any kind of housing option. There are good people in the world, after all. What if someone takes me in temporarily? Lola thought hopefully. Or if I offer someone help with household chores in exchange for a roof over my head? Lola's hopes dwindled with each passing minute. There were no takers for temporary shelter, and when she offered to help an elderly lady with household chores, she replied, I manage my own household just fine, but a little extra cash wouldn't hurt. Nevertheless, Lola tried not to despair. What else could she do? She decided to visit the barracks where she and Lucas rented an apartment. Housing was often rented out there, so why not give it a shot? And miracle of miracles, luck was on her side. Although it was hard to call it real luck. The person who agreed to rent Lola an apartment on credit lived in the neighboring barracks. Colin turned out to be an alcoholic. The apartment was dirty and smelled of stale alcohol, but it was still better than living on the streets. I expect payment in a month, said the landlord. Okay, Lola nodded, sincerely hoping to find any kind of work. Above all, she needed to avoid mentioning her pregnancy to any potential employer. But finding a job was tough. The landlord occasionally dropped by his place and inquired about the money. But the month hasn't passed yet, Lola invariably replied, suspecting that Colin needed the money for medications, in quotes. And the sooner, the better. Finally, she managed to get a job delivering groceries. We pay weekly, the administrator informed Lola, who nodded happily. She couldn't even dream of such luck. The pay was good, and by her calculations, she could pay off her rent on time. The rent was dirt cheap. After a week's work, Lola filled her fridge and set aside money for the apartment. But unfortunately, that was where her streak of good fortune ended. One day, she felt unwell right at work. Lola was leaving the shopping center, loaded with groceries she needed to deliver, when she collapsed. The alarmed administrator called an ambulance. Well, it's quite normal in your condition, said the doctor. But carrying such weights is definitely not normal. Wait, what condition are you talking about? The administrator asked. Your employee is pregnant, the doctor shrugged. Didn't you know? Yes, of course, Lola stammered, but I just. You know, the employer isn't allowed to refuse employment because of pregnancy. In this case, it's better to refrain from such work, the doctor said decisively. Anyway, we're taking her. Lola sighed heavily. She had only worked 2 days this week and wondered if she would be paid for her work. Back to no job, no money, Lola thought gloomily. And how am I going to pay for the apartment now? The only positive thing was that the hospital turned out to be much more comfortable than the smelly barracks apartment. You're at risk of miscarriage, said the attending doctor. So you'll have to stay with us. And for how long? A week, maybe 2, he replied. It all depends on your condition and the baby's. Can I call the landlord of the apartment I'm renting? Lola asked. Sure. Colin was uncompromising. Lola asked him to wait another week, explaining she needed to buy some medications, but the landlord insisted. These are your problems. Of course, she understood that Colin was already being too generous, but she hoped for his mercy. Do you have any money at all? He interrupted her complaints. Yes, in the kitchen cupboard under the blue teapot, replied Lola, hoping the landlord would see she could pay and give her some leeway. How naive. That's good, Colin noticeably brightened. I'll take the money, and you don't need to come back here anymore. Where can I get the key? At the Fourth City Hospital, Lola replied in resignation. I'll leave it with the duty nurse. Why aren't you eating? Emma asked, watching as her stepson, with a sullen expression, poked at his pilaf. I don't want to, muttered Simon, pushing his plate away. The boy missed Lola terribly, but knew better than to discuss it with his stepmother. She would start scolding and calling her a thief again. How are things? Cheerfully asked Trevor, returning from his business trip. Great, purred Emma, kissing her husband. Really? He smiled. That's fantastic. Where's Simon? He's in his room, she replied. Seeing his son, Trevor froze with his mouth open. Honestly, he didn't even recognize Simon at first. The boy had paled, become thinner, and looked very sad. Why are you sick again? He asked worriedly. Dad, let Lola come back, the boy replied, a tear rolling down his pale cheek. Trevor was at a loss. Son, I would gladly have her back, but I can't, he replied desperately. Lola. Trevor glanced at his wife, silently asking if Simon knew about the theft. Emma nodded almost imperceptibly. Dad, I heard. Emma thinks Lola stole the money, the perceptive child said. But that's not true. She's good, and Emma is bad. I was cold, and she was opening the window. Why are you going on about good and bad? Emma couldn't hold back. If it were that simple. Emma, don't shout at the child, Trevor said quietly but firmly. Well, sorry, she whined. Well, you understand. I do, her husband nodded. It cost me to go away, and Simon got sick again. Isn't that reason enough to listen to his request? Emma couldn't believe her ears. You're not seriously considering hiring that vagrant again, she exclaimed. If it really helps Simon, then yes. And besides, I would still like to hear both sides of the story, Trevor said without delay. Without delay, Trevor started looking for Lola. It wasn't easy, as she didn't have a permanent address. All he had was the address of the apartment she rented with the father of her child. But since they had broken up, she probably wouldn't have gone back to him after such betrayal. Although maybe she had acquaintances there? Trying is not torturing, reasoned Trevor. There are no other leads anyway. The street looked impoverished, and the successful businessman seemed like a person from another world there. Trevor showed locals the photo of Lola, but people just shrugged. He was on the brink of giving up and leaving when luck smiled on him. Yes, I saw that girl yesterday, nodded a woman in her 40s, wearing a floral dress and a worn-out cardigan. She was renting an apartment over there in that barracks, at Colin's place. Do you happen to know Colin's apartment number? Trevor asked eagerly. No, she shook her head. There aren't really any numbers there. Ask one of the residents where Colin lives, they'll tell you. We all know each other around here. Thank you so much. He thanked the woman and headed towards the barracks she indicated. Trevor approached the entrance and, seeing 3 drunken men, asked, "Guys, can you tell me how to find Colin?" "Well, let's say it's me," replied one of them, smiling and showing his remaining 4 teeth. "Let's say, or is it really you?" It's me, the man hastily replied, looking at Trevor with interest. "He's clearly hoping to get some money for drinks," guessed the businessman. "Well, whatever you say, sir, as long as the information turns out to be useful." The information turned out to be indeed valuable. For just $300, Trevor learned that Lola had indeed rented an apartment from the drunkard Colin, but he asked her to vacate due to non-payment. He was living off his mother. "So why should I house someone for free?" said Colin. Trevor absent-mindedly nodded. "And where is she now, do you know?" "Day before yesterday, she was at the 4th City Hospital. Called me, tried to talk me into waiting another week. I refused. I'm not a charity." "Understood," he nodded again and, taking out the money from Emma's wallet, walked away. How low must someone be to kick out a pregnant woman from her apartment, Trevor thought indignantly. Though what else could I expect from a lowlife? However, another detail intrigued him more. If Lola had supposedly stolen the money, as Emma claimed, then how come she couldn't afford to pay for this shack? The answer was clear: Lola hadn't stolen anything, and on top of that, Emma hadn't paid her a single penny. Trevor felt terribly awkward. Lola had worked for him almost a whole month, performing excellently. And Simon? The boy not only recovered but also grew fond of her. I simply must find her, Trevor decided, and drove to the 4th City Hospital, praying that Lola would still be there. Threat of miscarriage, Lola sadly smiled, and Trevor's heart clenched. Due to stress, it's all 1-to-1. And that's how I ended up here. Trevor mentally grasped his head. This wasn't what he wanted for people who worked for him, assuming they did it well. At work, he raised his eyebrows in confusion. "Yeah," she nodded. "After Emma fired me, I started looking for a new job and got hired by a grocery delivery service." "Lola, I wanted to talk to you about this dismissal," he began. "It's a very delicate matter and—" Trevor fell silent, unsure of what to say next. Lola came to his rescue. "Trevor Roy, I didn't take your wife's wallet." "Well, I did take it, but I didn't look inside. I just wanted to return it to her." Desperation tinged Lola's voice, and the businessman finally believed it all to be true. "I believe you," Trevor said quietly. "And I want to offer you to come back. Are you willing?" "But your wife won't let me work," Lola replied uncertainly. "I'll take care of my wife," Trevor assured her. "Okay, then I agree," she nodded. "Now, rest up and eat your vitamins," he smiled. "Simon and I are really looking forward to having you back." Doctors exerted tremendous efforts, and they managed to save Lola's pregnancy. Trevor came for her discharge and brought Simon along. "I'm so glad you're coming back," Simon said seriously as he looked at her. Seeing Lola, Emma pursed her lips unhappily but said nothing. She didn't know what to do. These poor women. Remarkably resilient creatures, Emma thought disparagingly. You opened the door for them, and they climbed through the window. Trevor still didn't believe her. Simon quickly recovered again, began running around, his cheeks rounded and pink. The boy loved walking with his nanny. They went to the zoo, amusement park, and other places suitable for little visitors. Once, Simon and Lola even went to the forest, found a puppy, adopted him, and named him Crush. Trevor was happy, but something still nagged at him. What could it be? "Lola, you're simply a miracle worker," he said one day. Simon has recovered again, seems to have grown stronger, more cheerful. "What do you do with him?" "Miracles, that's what." "There are no miracles," Lola replied bashfully. Simon was moved to another room, and that was the first step. Optimal room temperature, plus carefully selected medications, those are the only miracles. It's something any first-year med student can handle. At the mention of temperature, Trevor suddenly remembered his son's words about Emma. I was cold, but she kept opening the window. So that's what caused the concern that had been haunting him for days. Trevor had often pondered why his son's room was damp. His initial thought was that maybe the builders had made a mistake somewhere, resulting in increased humidity and, consequently, frequent colds. By the way, Trevor could have taken the construction company to court. However, after his son's words, a dreadful thought settled in his mind. What if Emma deliberately kept Simon's room cold? Was it no coincidence that she insisted I send him to a health camp? Seemed simple enough. Simon was in her way. Trevor realized that he couldn't simply accuse his wife of such a thing and decided to order an independent inspection. Deep down, he held a faint hope that he was wrong. After all, Trevor couldn't have married a woman capable of intentionally harming his son's health. It must be said, relations between the spouses became strained. Once, seemingly casually, Emma brought up again that it was inappropriate for the help to dine at the same table as the masters. For the help, perhaps, Trevor calmly nodded. But Lola has become a family member for us, Simon and me. She healed our son, for which I will be grateful to her for the rest of my days. She healed him? Emma squinted. So they stopped. The young woman abruptly fell silent. Trevor looked at her intently. Stopped what? Nothing, his wife snapped. Actually, it's time for us to end this charade, Trevor. I'm filing for divorce. Go ahead, he replied indifferently. Are you really planning to divorce? As if, dear, as if, Veronica smirked slyly. No, I'll go to the registry office, do everything properly, and Trevor will start chasing after me, begging to withdraw the application. Are you sure? Dina chuckled skeptically. Absolutely. Emma turned out to be a poor prophetess. Trevor signed the divorce agreement without a word. Moreover, he stated he intended to give Emma what she was entitled to, which was nothing. Being a foresight man, Mr. Roy had drawn up a prenuptial agreement, leaving the greedy lady with nothing. Be grateful I didn't report you for taking money from the safe, Trevor said after the divorce proceedings. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Emma glared at him hatefully, but it made no impression on him. Well, darling, notice this, I didn't file for divorce, Trevor smirked. And here's a reminder for you. Her ex-husband handed Emma the results of an independent investigation. Now that's everything, he said. Goodbye. I wish you luck in finding another fool. Oh, go to hell, Emma retorted and stormed off, her heels echoing loudly. She was furious. How could I be so foolish, she thought. Oh well, I'll make their lives miserable. That same evening, armed with a canister of gasoline and a lighter, Emma headed to the house where she had lived comfortably. Lola and Simon were playing dominoes with picture cards, while Krosh happily wagged his tail nearby. Trevor was expected back any moment, so they decided to delay dinner. It smells like something's burning, Simon remarked. Lola sniffed and also caught the scent of smoke. In the next second, she horror-strickenly saw flames through the window. Lola, I'm scared, Simon cried. It's okay, my dear, it's okay, she reassured him, picking him up and rushing toward the exit. There was no time to waste. Another second, and the fire would block their path to safety. Lola swiftly set Simon down in the grass, far from the flames, and took a deep breath. Give me the boy, a neighbor rushed over and took Simon in her arms. I've already called the fire department. But Krosh is in there. Simon yelled, and despite the neighbor's warnings, Lola dashed back into the house for the puppy. What a crazy woman, someone muttered, but abandoning the poor animal to perish wasn't in her nature. Without hesitation, she plunged into the inferno, and moments later, a deafening explosion echoed as the house collapsed like a house of cards. Turning onto his street, Trevor Roy couldn't believe his eyes. The house he had poured his heart into was engulfed in flames. Maybe this is a dream or hallucination, the businessman hoped, but when he finally realized it wasn't, his thoughts turned to dread. I hope no one was hurt. Trevor pressed harder on the gas pedal. "Where's my son?" he shouted, leaping out of the car. "The boy is with the neighbors," one of the firefighters said, and Trevor rushed toward the neighbor's house, hoping Lola and the dog were safe too. But it seemed that hope was not meant to be. Simon was sobbing uncontrollably, hysterical. "Lo! Lo! Lola!" The child stuttered, deeply shaken. "And Krosh, they. The man understood everything. He refused to believe it. The composed businessman broke down in tears like a child. Even the neighbor who had taken Simon in shed tears. "Dad, are they hurt?" the son asked. "No, of course not," the father sadly smiled. "They're not in pain anymore. They're in heaven. Okay, get ready. Let's go to Grandma's." "Why go anywhere tonight?" said the neighbor, whose name was Eloisa. "Stay with us, and tomorrow you can go. Come on, make yourselves comfortable on the second floor." The house was nearly completely burned down and was beyond repair. Fortunately, it was insured. The only thing that survived was the fireproof safe, the very one that had been a tempting target for Emma. Surveillance cameras captured her setting the fire, and Trevor reported her to the police. But what could they do with his ex-wife, who was as poor as a church mouse? They couldn't even send her to prison, as Emma was declared mentally incompetent and placed in a psychiatric hospital. Neither Lola nor the dog were ever found. They likely burned without a trace. The gas explosion spread the fire so quickly, the specialists concluded. 4 months passed. Life went on, and Trevor tried his best to move forward, especially for the sake of his growing son, the reason he had to keep going. He bought a cozy 3-bedroom apartment in the city center and started building a new house. But every time he imagined Lola would never step into that house again, he felt the urge to go out and scream in frustration. Only after losing her did he realize he had been in love with her. But what good was that realization now? All he could do for his beloved was to construct something like a memorial at the site of her death. Trevor visited there and brought fresh flowers each time. "I never got to tell you that I love you," Trevor whispered, looking up at the sky, hoping Lola could hear him. One warm Sunday afternoon in September, the Roy family was walking through the park and noticed a pregnant young woman with a dog. "Dad, that's Lola with Krosh," Simon exclaimed joyfully. Trevor stared at her, the dog, and eventually pinched himself. They couldn't possibly rise from the ashes. The dog hurriedly ran towards Trevor and Simon, while the pregnant woman looked at them indifferently. "Lola, hi," the boy cheerfully said. "Who are you?" she asked flatly. "I'm Simon," the child replied, almost in tears. Trevor looked at Lola in confusion and then realized she likely had amnesia. Never mind, the businessman thought, his heart beating with joy. Amnesia can be treated. And then something incredible happened. Lola looked at the handsome, well-dressed man and the boy who looked just like him, and suddenly remembered. Somewhere, she had seen them before. But where? The dog ran up to the boy, and in the young woman's mind, a forest suddenly appeared. She and the boy were picking up the dog and taking it to a large, beautiful house. Some woman with a beautiful but harsh face. A fire. "Lola," the boy cried out, and the young woman suddenly realized that was her name. "Trevor Roy?" "Simon?" she hesitantly asked and then fainted. Lola woke up in a tastefully decorated apartment. Krosh quietly whimpered, gazing at his owner. She explained that while saving the puppy, she had been hit hard on the head by a burning beam. Unconscious at the time of the gas explosion, Lola and the puppy had been blown out of the burning house. And then in shock, "I wandered wherever my eyes took me," she quietly said. "Where have you been all this time?" Trevor asked, amazed. "On the streets," Lola replied, shyly looking down. "I won't let you go anywhere anymore," the enamored man whispered, taking her hands in his. "Well then, kiss," Simon said cheerfully and laughed. "Can I look away? Just like that right away?" Trevor chuckled, but still embraced his beloved, whom he had never expected to see alive. Lola underwent rehabilitation. The lovers got married. And on New Year's Eve, she suddenly felt that motherhood was just hours away. After Trevor, his parents, Amanda Scott, David Johnson, and some of the businessman's friends had drunk champagne for the coming year, his mobile rang. "Lola, how are you?" the excited man exclaimed. "Everything's great," Lola replied, laughing. "And Dia too. Weight 3,700. Height 52. She sends her regards to you." And to her as well, joyously shouted the happy father and turned to those present. "Did you hear? Now I have 2 children. Simon will be happy to know tomorrow." "Dad, I heard everything," said the son, coming out of his room with his faithful 4-legged friend. "And Cross too. And we're happy. But we've decided we need another child." "Well, that won't be a problem," the happy father said cheerfully, pouring champagne for the newborn, and the guests happily supported him. This new year became the best in businessman Trevor Roy's life because his family became real, grew larger, and it was all worth living for.